Welcome to Ecologic for the beautiful month of November. It's getting real cool. The trees are kind of turning leaves. It's a pretty time of the year for us. We've been dry, very dry, and that has caused some major problems for our crawfish future. The waters in South Vermilion, over towards Cameron, Jeff Davis Parish, can't be pumped onto the rice field for crawfish because its salinity is way too high. I'm going to talk briefly about progress we've made in the flood issue that affects the Lafayette and the whole Acadiana area, and be talking about the plans for a new electric plant for LUS that we should be well informed about and understand. So, first of all, on the flood, every little bit counts. DOTD is rebuilding the Lake Martin Road, and in rebuilding that road, they realized that the road was a dam across the Cypress Island swamps. About 25% of the wetlands in those swamps is isolated by that road. That's about 5,000 or 6,000 acres of swampland that is not under retention unless the water goes over the road. The road's at 14-foot elevation, so when it goes over the road, everybody's flooded already. So that doesn't do any good. So DOTD, working along with St. Martin Parish officials, have put a giant culvert and that will connect that 5,000 or 6,000 acres that's isolated by the spoil banks of the Ruth Canal and by the Lake Martin Road and by the Lake Martin levees itself. Which will mean much lower water levels for Lafayette when a big flood comes. We can put about 12 feet in those 6,000 acres, so that's 72,000 surface acre feet of retention we'll be gaining. Had we had that in place in 2016, we could have easily lowered water about 2 feet, and that's a wild guess, but it certainly would have lowered water levels significantly to connect that part of the retention zone that is currently disconnected by unintentional dams. The next big issue that will help the flooding is when the flood from North Louisiana comes down to Baycatawla, they put it into Henderson, and then that goes into the Chafly River. The problem with Henderson is it's got a bunch of unintentional dams. The biggest one was the Dixie Pipeline. Two big spoil banks that go from one side to the other, and there's only one opening way over on the east side. So when the water from Baycatawla flood goes into Henderson, it quickly fills up and it no longer becomes available retention zone that helps lower water here in Lafayette. So they have cut about 30 openings in that old swamp, and they've selected the openings around existing bayous and waterways. So the flow will be reestablished when the water comes down, and it not only help with the flood, but it will improve the water quality for fisheries and so forth in the whole area. So that's two big items. The next big item is Lake Cocodrie up in Evangeline Rapides is a 7,000 acre lake that has no drain. They plan, again, this is DOTD doing this, because when Hurricane Laura came, it flooded the lake and brought it up to a level about 14 feet above the dam level. And then Delta came about a month later, and the water hadn't drained and raised another 6 feet, which put Highway 167 underwater. That's a federal highway. When they go underwater, they have to have a solution. And you can raise the highway or lower the water. The highway department realized much better to lower the water, because lowering the water levels by putting a significant drain in that lake will give us enormous retention. The 7,000 acres that with a sizable gate, we can drop that 10 feet and now we have 70,000 surface acre feet of retention that we didn't have before. So that's a significant lowering of water levels, and it doesn't take much to make a lot of difference. Of the 10,700 homes that flooded in the test for a million watershed from Alexandria on down, 73% had less than a foot of water. So had we lowered the water a foot, 73% of the homes would have not had water in them. That's very significant. So that project is going to make a big difference. Then the plans are underway to put a gate in the Bayou Catawba gates that would lower the water levels in the swamps that are normally retention areas. The test for a million keeps that whole area at 18 feet, and that keeps the Buff-Cocodra swamp flooded. It keeps the Thistleway swamp flooded, the Bayou Waukesha swamps, the Darbon swamps. All those swamps stay underwater because those swamps at about 13, 14 foot elevation, and we keep in Catawba at 18. So being able to have put in a gate of a significant size that will drop those swamp levels in anticipation of a flood coming will make a very significant difference in how high the water gets. And we know that from what happened in Hurricane Barry. Hurricane Barry was a test of that theory. The pumps were shut off 7 days before the flood came. That drained all the retention area. It also drained Cypress Island Swamp. It was the lowest the Vermilion had been in 37 years. So when Hurricane Barry was much worse potentially than the flood of 016, because 016 didn't have a hurricane storm surge. 016, the water level in the Chaflower River was only at 8 feet. For Hurricane Barry, the water level in the Chaflower River was at 20. It was at flood stage. And we had a big hurricane storm surge, very significant storm surge flood, 14, 15 foot elevation that came all the way up the Maid, all the way to Ebroussard, all the way, but it poured into Cypress Island because Cypress Island was totally empty. And then a hurricane storm surge doesn't last very long. It heats a peak and then it backs out. So it was backing down by the time the rain event came, and that allowed us to go a long ways from the predicted flood. The flood was predicted by the U.S. Weather Service and USGS computer models, be it 17 feet at Surrey Bridge. The flood of 016 was 17.1. So a lot of the weather reporters on television were saying if you flooded in 016, you have a 99% of flooding again. Well, the fact that the swamps were emptied by the cutting off of the pumps, shutting the pumps down, gave us this enormous retention area that was emptied. And instead of going to 17, it came to 12.3, which flooded no one. So all good news about the things that are happening with the flood. So hopefully we get to a point, there's some other things we'd like to do that are hopefully in the plans, and eventually we'll find our way to get them done. But a lot of credit has to be given to St. Martin Parish, St. Landry Parish, of Oils and Rapides, all of whom are working on these projects one by one to make our situation better. So with that, I'm going to go on to talk about Lafayette's electricity. The plan that's coming forth is being brought about by the mandate, a federal mandate, that our 50% owned coal-fired plant up in Alexandria has to be shut down in about 3 years. So just give a little history of Lafayette's electricity in LUS. It goes back to 1897. They built the Grant Street power plant, which was a 98 megawatt power plant, which was a heck of a lot more than we needed. But a lot of the electricity was being used by the Southern Pacific Rail Yard, the Roundhouse, which was overhauling steam trains. Steam trains didn't have common parts, and to rebuild them and fix them, all the parts have to be handmade, which means they ran a lot of lathes and cutting materials and so forth to deal with rebuilding those refurbishing steam trains as they needed to be repaired. They used the same fuel the trains fueled, number 6 bunker oil, and they were always concerned about a rail strike that would shut down Lafayette utilities. So, with that in mind, they maintained about 45-day supply of fuel, which required like 6 full tank cars on standby and a giant swimming pool type of pond under the Grant Street power plant site. And it leaked like a sieve, which gives us a big saturated, it's not just the railroad that has contaminants under the own Grant Street power plant has very significant contamination. There are a bunch of monitoring wells verifying that and are being watched. But we have no plan to fix that I'm aware of. And so Grant Street power plant was built in 1897, 98 megawatt. It operated till about 1953, 54, when the Bonac gas-fired plant was built, a 300 megawatt plant. It produced most of the power that Lafayette needed. We built, after the Bonac plant, we built all the way up to 85. We built the Rhodemaker power plant that's on Pinhook and General Gardner. It's still there. It's not operating, but it's still there. That was a 100 megawatt plant. And it barely operated because when it got going, Lafayette made a deal with Cleco to buy half interest in a coal-fired plant up at Boyce, Louisiana. That's been our power source. It's about a 500 megawatt plant, and we have half of it, so we have about 250 megawatts. Now it's got some issues. One, the distance from Lafayette caused some major problems because you have to move that electricity around, which required a very significant use of the transmission lines that generally belong to Cleco, and a very significant expense. About 4.5 cents a kW to transform the power to the high voltage you need to move it across the country, from 20 or 30,000 volts up to 600,000-700,000 volts, and then it has to be transformed down to where we can use it back down, and all that takes a lot of power, a lot of expense, and we're having to pay for it. Takes 120 boxcars of coal to run that plant, so half of them are ours. We have about $50 million worth of coal cars. To deliver that coal from Gillette, Wyoming to Boyce, Louisiana costs almost $1 million a month. Right at $2 million to send the power 1,500 miles from Gillette to Alexandria. Then it costs like $7 million a year to ship it from Alexandria 15 miles north. We pay an extraordinary price for that. But the total is about $1 million a month to haul the coal around. We have about to move the power along, that costs us about $10 million a month is what it costs to move that power from Alexandria here over those transmission lines. Then we have close to $1 million a month is the employee and overhead costs of running the plant. And so it gives credibility to the fact that we should be generating our own power here in Lafayette and not shipping it across the country. But along about 2000, MISO came into existence, which is a company that is solely a nonprofit that moves electricity around and minimizes the loss. It generally copies the Texas process of you get your power from the closest generating source, and so that is an overall savings. So what we are a MISO member, and I guess for the last 15 years or so, we almost totally buy everything from MISO. The problem with buying from MISO is it's an hourly spot market, and the price is going to keep going up, especially as we plug in more and more electric cars. Kilowatt is what we speak about, is how we measure electricity. It's 10 100-watt light bulbs running for 1 hour. A typical home will use about, and that's about 12 to 16 kilowatt hours a 24-hour day. Now you look at what an electric car, or electric truck, for instance, the Ford Lightning is 138 kW. That'll run a typical house for about 3 weeks. So we start plugging in all these electric vehicles, it's going to put enormous demand on our generating capacity. And with MISO as an hourly spot market, as that demand goes up, the price goes up. And so what we're looking at, what Lafayette should be looking at, is how we can use the most what is the most economical power, and can we get it? The most economical power is wind. There's not any available wind locally. We'd like to see that change because we think our coastal bays are a low-cost area to build wind power, offshore wind power, and hopefully that will happen. But it's not generally not available. The next is combined cycle gas, and the modern combined cycle gas units are very efficient. They have a jet turbine engine like you have on an airplane, runs one side of the generator, and on the same shaft, the exhaust from that jet engine produces steam, and that goes to the steam turbine generator hooked up to the same shaft. These units are at 63%, 65% efficient, and they're generally low cost, and comparatively speaking, and they have a big advantage in that they can be powered with natural gas. They can be powered with J-fuel, just like they do on airplanes. They can be powered with a combination of natural gas and hydrogen, or hydrogen alone. So when we look at cost of power, wind is the lowest cost power. The next is the combined cycle turbines. The next is solar. And then waste heat recovery is next. And all four of those are around 3 cents power. And way last in line is these single cycle or coal plants that go astronomically high in cost. And so where's Lafayette going? Lafayette's future very much depends on how they operate. From the Grant Street power plant to the Bonaire plant, all the way to 1985, Lafayette operated totally independently for about 88 years of their history. They were totally independent of any electrical facility. They married Clico in 1985, and that's been a very expensive marriage, so to speak. Mainly we lost our independence. Then getting hooked up with MISO is a good thing. It offers low-cost power, but you have to move it around, and it's not local power. That means and that transmission cost is very high. It's 4.5 cents a kW, and the cost of the power might be 4 or 5 cents. It might go to 10 or 12 cents at peak hours. The cost through MISO is unpredictable, and it certainly will go up as demand for electricity goes up astronomically as we plug in more and more electric cars. You think in 5 years we could have 10% of the cars in Lafayette Parish would be electric. We have 200,000 cars in Lafayette Parish. That's 20,000 cars we plug into these things. Eight Lightning trucks, Ford Lightning trucks, need 1 megawatt. That's 1,000 kilowatts of power. 1 megawatt powers 900 homes. So as the great idea of getting electric cars running, they either be running or they're going to be charging. That's going to create a awful high demand. And so once we got into the coal-fired plant up in Boyce, that still didn't give us enough power. So we built the Lobby and Abear plant, and those are each 100 megawatt of power. Lafayette needs around 450, 500 megawatts during peak need. So that gave us, these are very inefficient, obsolete engines. This is their GE Frame 5 units. They're 450 megawatt units. They were taking the engines off of the old 747s. These engines were being replaced by a lot more efficient engines. The original engines that were built by General Electric were 8% efficient. The newer engines are right at 30% efficient. And so GE married these old engines that were inefficient to generators and sold them to cities like Lafayette, didn't know a kilowatt from an apple, and bought these things which were obsolete. They're too expensive to operate. So they only operate as peaking units. They only operate 2-3% of the time. So if Lafayette has a future, I mean, what we have, our electricity is very important to the cost of living for your home, or the cost of running a business. Lafayette has probably three main categories of power. One is residential. We have 34,000 customers. The next is churches and schools, which operate at the same price as residential. And then we have commercial, which operates on a different system of charging. They charge peak demand. And what peak demand means is that in a 720-hour month, the most you use in 15 minutes is the rate that you are charged all 720 hours. What it means is that it multiplies your rate. If you are paying straight power, peak demand charges multiplies your rate 2.5 times. So if you got a restaurant using straight power, $2,000 worth, on peak demand you go to $5,000. And that has a big factor. You look at how many restaurants are closing. A big cost of that, big issue is profitability, and peak demand denies profits for a lot of places that actually puts them out of business. We're closing 5 or 6 Kentucky Fried Chickens, and I can assure you their peak demand bill is $4,000 or $5,000 a month. If we didn't have peak demand in Lafayette, those restaurants probably would stay open. So our future is very dependent on how we manage our electricity. And, you know, the fact that we are dependent on MISO. MISO can raise their rates as nobody can. Rates are not controlled by the Public Service Commission. It's an hourly spot market. They can charge anything that the market demands that they charge. They're totally a nonprofit. They certainly don't want to be a loss. They don't want to operate at a loss. So when the need for electricity goes during high demand, the price goes up, and that's the real problem with the MISO program. So we're looking forward. When we look at the most efficient operation of electricity, which we don't have access, we certainly have access to the solar. To get that solar, and I was involved with a big company, Next Era, asked them to look at a solar facility for Lafayette, which 3 years ago they agreed to look at it. They needed property. They needed 1,000 acres to build a 100 megawatt facility for Lafayette. And that was accommodated by the Chapuis family, who worked out a contract with Next Era. That project will probably go forward. But in Lafayette had a informal commitment to acquire that power, which they have totally backed out of. The initial contract agreement was 2.8 cents per hour, and by the way, we pay 9 cents for it at home, for a 25-year contract. the big advantage of renewable energy, it is low cost, long-term fixed price contracts, which MISO can't offer. Now, solar is very available to us. We have a solar plant that's being built on I-10 right near Louisiana, between Louisiana Avenue and Burbridge. It's just north of I-10. We have one being built with 2,500 acre site built at Port Barry, which is very air miles, only about 25 air miles from Lafayette. We have one being built in Jeff Davis Parish, and we have another big one being built in St. Mary Parish. So there's 4 very significant solar facilities that can offer by contract long-term, low-cost, fixed-price contracts. That doesn't cost us anything. That has the hope of significantly lower the cost of power to everybody. Now, if you live in a 5,000 square foot home in one of the richest subdivisions in Lafayette, you don't care if your electric bill is $5,000 a month or $500 a month. But to poorer people, that's a tough issue. Electricity expense is a big part of their budget, and for some people, it's whether I have air conditioning or whether I eat. So for a lot of people, low income, the cost of electricity is very important. It's a very important item for businesses. Everything we can do to lower costs of power for commercial contracts is very, very important to our economic future. People will not come to Lafayette knowing that Lafayette has a coal-fired plant, which is all being closed now. So with all this, we have combined cycle, which is very available. It's just whether we go with a single cycle, very expensive unit that will run only 870 hours a year. That's what the plan is. Combined cycle is very efficient, environmentally sound. The solar certainly is available. Waste heat recovery is certainly available, and lots of opportunities to gain that. The waste heat recovery right now, Clayco is building 2 50 megawatt units, one at Cabot in St. Mary Parish, and one at Cabot in Ville Platte, which they're going to pipe the heat like 7 or 8 miles from a carbon black plant that makes the carbon black as raw material for synthetic rubber. That's what our tires are made of. They're going to pipe it to the old St. Landry facility. A good move on the part of Clayco. It's a very inexpensive process of producing electricity. In fact, the cost is generally around 3 cents a kW. So there are other forms of electricity that could come into play. One of the things interesting, we're building a cellulose pellet plant using bagasse in Generate. Most of those pellets will go to Europe, where they take these wood pellets and pulverize it into superfine dust that's mixed with air and run through combined cycle gas turbine engines. So there's lots of possibilities that are super low cost compared to what we plan to do. And it costs, I had to buy this plant, which is sitting on the desk. The city officials wouldn't give it. I had to pay $1 a page. It was $120 to get this report, but I'm glad it did because it tells us what we're looking at. Where is Lafayette going? What is the plan forward to deal with closing the Rotamaker plant up in Boyce, Louisiana? To close it, we need to replace that generating capacity to be able to stay online with MISO. So what is this plan going to cost us? We look at page 1.4, and here are the numbers. To clean up and demolish the old Bonan plant is $12 million. The new plant is $259 million. The MISO transmission cost is a $50 million fee, and then financing fees and interest, $37 million. So a total of $358 million. Sounds like a big number for a plant. This plant will only operate, and I have the exact number, 870 hours a year. That is 5 weeks. That's 10% of the time. And the reason it can't operate much more because it won't meet the air standards if it operated more, which is a real environmental problem, I think. That, you know, if you have to start deal with carbon sequestration and all of that, you're going to raise the dickens of the expense, and we will be paying that expense. You know, if global warming is an issue, then this is, and it certainly is, because around the country we're dealing with carbon emissions and piping in all over the country, including a giant project that Exxon is doing and bringing great carbon emissions from plants in Baton Rouge to Vermilion Parish near Intracoastal City. So this is a real important issue. The plant will be operated one giant generator, a big jet engine, and this one facility will produce 240 megawatts. That replaces the 250 megawatts that we currently operate out of with the coal-fired plant. But there's other strings attached to this coal-fired plant. The coal-fired plant, to decommission it, to take it out, will cost as much to take it out as it costs to build it. Duke Energy in North Carolina had a major problem in one of the waste ponds overspilled into river waters that polluted the water for 3 million people. And as a result of that, Duke was mandated to close 10 of the coal-fired plants they had in North Carolina. The cost of doing that is $12 billion. That's $1.2 billion per plant. And Duke is closing those plants according to EPA standards, which we are mandated to follow the same. Our half, if it's $1.2 billion, we own half, so I'm at $600 million we have to come up with to close that plant. And we don't have a dime set aside for it. I know some of the officials think, oh, $15 to $20 million. Then if that was true, Duke Energy in North Carolina would be taking the $15 million instead of the $1.2 billion per plant to clean up. You have the coal site where the coal is stored on the ground. That has to be cleaned. The plant itself has to be cleaned. You got a big waste pond, and that waste pond overflows right into the Red River, going right down to the Schaffelaya, where that is being pumped and sent down to Vermilion right to us. Did we have a pollution issue, that water would be coming right through Lafayette, as that has actually occurred in North Carolina, where the drinking water for 3 million people had to be shut down. So to close that plant is going to be an enormous expense. My contention is if we use modern, instead of using this, there's a lot of options we can deal with. One of the best opportunities is to use as much solar as we can acquire. That doesn't cost anything but to sign a contract to buy it. And there are ample opportunities within a short distance of Lafayette. 100 megawatt facility was planned for Lafayette, and Lafayette backed out of it. And I think the engineering firm, they're going to recommend mostly items. The firm is Burns McDonnell, which has the same people that recommended these old GE units that they stuck us with, and that's too inefficient to operate. But I think that they recommend what is best for their bottom line and their profitability. which doesn't include us buying solar, because they don't make a dime. I recommend that we acquire solar at low cost, long-term, fixed prices. Those contracts are available. Talking to the next year, which is operating three of these plants, they'd be glad to sell us 200 megawatts of power, which is about half of our power. And so this costs us nothing. There's another opportunity that would cost us nothing, and that's the merchant power plant. There are companies that would come to Lafayette, rebuild that whole facility, put in all the equipment at no expense to us. Our part of it is to agree to buy the power from that merchant power plant for a 15 or 18 or 20-year term. But we don't put a nickel for it. And they would use the most modern, most efficient equipment available. They would use these combined cycle turbines that are 63% efficient, that can operate on J fuel, they can run on natural gas, a combination of natural gas and hydrogen, or pure hydrogen. We are building around the country 6 of these hydrogen production facilities. I think one of them is going to be in the Houston area. The future of power is certainly with hydrogen, because hydrogen is really powerful, it's efficient, and its only emission is water vapor. So it's something that deals with all the issues, but a merchant power plant would cost Lafayette nothing. Now, when you think about it, we got $354 million that you and I will pay for on a facility that operates with an unknown cost future. I mean, the fact that natural gas goes up and down in price, but a single cycle unit is only 20% efficient. If we operated more than 10% of the year, we'd have to deal with air emissions and carbon sequestration and other enormous expense. So it's very important that we get informed about where we're going with this electricity. We can do it better. Lafayette needs to go back to its original historical posture of being independent. No, that's great to buy MISO, it helps service, but the MISO conglomerate, which runs electricity from Canada in the middle of the border country all the way down to the Gulf. But that marriage has faults in it, and the fact that we would build a $354 million plant and only operate it 10% of the time doesn't make a lot of sense to me at all. So hopefully we look at all these factors. There were 2 public hearings that were held, and hearings were held kind of after the fact, after a lot of decisions on this road has been made. And it's a shame that we are putting a plan forward that uses obsolete equipment, that is dependent on a cost factor that is unknown, when there's a lot better ways to do it. The Chamber of Commerce people, the people who run businesses, the people who run the hospitals, the big users, they're going to be in a spot where it may be a lot more efficient to self-generate. It's kind of interesting. There's a little urgent care type facility in the oil center that is currently for sale, and they have standby generators, which they decide they shut the electricity, but times they wanted to have air conditioning on for people to look at it, and so they're running on their standby generators, and they found out it costs half to run on their half standby generators, half of what the city was charging them for power, LUS was charging. So I think some of the big users will find that it might be a lot more efficient to self-generate. And there's certain equipment available to allow them to do that. So the electricity future for Lafayette is now. Decisions are being made. The new administration probably needs to take a real hard look at it. We need to have the most efficient power available. We have at the lowest cost to the citizens of the community. A merchant power plant agreement wouldn't cost us a dime. To buy solar power wouldn't cost us a dime. We certainly have opportunities in waste heat recovery. The Sasol plant in Lake Charles, their waste heat recovery could put out 1,500 megawatts of power. That would supply all the power from Lake Charles to Lafayette and everything in between. 1,500 megawatts would cover that, and that's low-cost waste heat recovery. These options need to be seriously looked at and dealt with, and a plan pushed forward that is, gives Lafayette low-cost, clean power, the cleanest, the most environmentally sound power available at the lowest possible cost. A merchant power plant could be built. There's a company out of North Carolina has offered to do that. They would come in, they would go into the Bonaire plant, they wouldn't charge Lafayette a dime. All they want is a 15-year contract to purchase power. As opposed to, that would give us the resources we need to pay the closing costs of the Rodemaker plant. It's time for us to go back to independence, and this would be a path forward. It's kind of interesting. Lafayette power plant came up for sale, during 4 or 5 years ago. A big company out of Baton Rouge wanted to buy LUS, which would have been a big mistake. But that had happened before. In 1916, I think Gulf States wanted to buy LUS, and they came close to doing it, but I think the board of supervisors for LUS, finally declined that offer to sell it. So, very important that Lafayette has enjoyed that independence. It's not only electricity that they produce; they run the water system and they run the sewer system. You go to Baton Rouge, has a private water system. Lafayette has its own. So that's been a formula for success over the years. And the fact that we had electricity in 1897 made a big difference when they were deciding where to put a college in southwest Louisiana. Lake Charles wanted it, Crowley wanted it, Abbeville wanted it, New Iberia, Franklin, all trying to get this college because they knew what it would meant for the future of the community. And Lafayette had their power plant, and so they had electricity. So that was a winning issue in getting UL, Southwestern University, whatever it was called back then, to site in Lafayette, which is a very important part of Lafayette's future. So it's this electrical generation, the new administration needs to look real hard. Certainly been very involved. I was very disappointed. We worked to get the solar plant here in Lafayette, and I found out about a year and a half ago from the Next Era people that Lafayette had totally backed out of purchasing solar power, which is, the cheapest. Solar power is super cheap, and it's cheap over long term. It's a fixed price. The cost of the sun doesn't change, and that's the same for wind, which is not available generally to us. Should be, but I would hope that we make a better decision than what is being planned. As the $354 million, we can all pay for it, and they'll only retire this debt with high pay. I was just looking at just the debt service at 5% interest in running this plant, $875. The cost per kilowatt. Now, we pay 9 cents a kilowatt, but just the debt service on this is 12 cents a kilowatt. Then you got to have fuel, you got to have operational expense. You see the future costs, and we have a plant you can't afford to operate. You can't afford not to operate it, but it's a mandate for MISO, and it totally puts us dependent on MISO. And MISO is been a very successful, but the times are changing, and the time for us to go back to our own self-reliance, our own independent power, that time has come. It's very important, and and it's not just when we say independent power to buy from nearby solar facilities doesn't cost us a dime, and lowers the hell out of our rates. This is cheap power, and it's fixed price. It's predictable what it's going to be 10 years from now. Now, if you got a gas-fired or MISO facility, they can't tell you 10 hours what the cost will be. It's an hourly fixed market. So it's very important that we as citizens look real hard, that look at the new administration, hope that they're looking at it. And my feeling is that, like Lafayette dealt with recycling, and that's many years ago under Mayor Douglas Jobs. He said, I don't know anything about recycling. I said, well, most of us don't either, but if we put together a blue ribbon committee and make recommendations to you, decisions are all yours to make. But we will look at and find the best course forward. And so Lafayette set up some interesting recycling programs. One is the yard waste. And the big problem with yard waste is I was involved in making a decision. We went to yard waste facilities somewhere in Ohio. They've been stacking leaves for 20 years. The leaves at the bottom of the stack was still leaves. So when is this going to decompose into something you could use as compost material? And the answer came in that the path forward means if we could tub grind the grass, leaves, and branches, we'd reduce the volume by 85% the day we got it. And the compost was cured in 6 months. Phenomenal success. That's a third of our waste. And it's very expensive waste because if you load a truck that could carry 80,000 pounds with leaves and branches, it only carries 14,000 pounds. So it's very expensive hauling to the landfill. And they're just putting something in a landfill that should be going in our gardens. And not only is it being used for free giveaway, it's saving a fortune, by doing that, but it can be sold as a fuel. In fact, you have 90 days when you tub grind it. That material, kind of sawdust consistent, can be sold as fuel, and Lafayette is selling it as a fuel. And so it's kind of a form of renewable energy, very important. And then the recycling of sewer sludge. A third of our waste was yard waste. 20% of our waste was our sewer plants. There's sludge that comes out of the plant that is 5% solid. To bring it to landfill, it has to be 20% solid. So it has to be heated at a cost of like $50 a ton to heat it, and we're producing 100 tons a day of sewer sludge. And then you got to haul it to the landfill at $30 a ton, so we're paying $80 a ton. So this committee worked out a plan which required going to the legislature, getting a bill passed that would allow it in Louisiana, which we did. The only successful bill I think ever put through the Louisiana legislature that allowed for recycling of sewer sludge on hay fields and on farmland. Phenomenal success in that. So just those two alone is 55% of our waste, and saves a fortune in bills. We save over $1 million a month in landfill costs by recycling yard waste and sewer sludge. And then, of course, we have the curbside recycling, which is only about 10%, the newspapers and cans and so forth, plastic, they're recycled. But Lafayette has one of them, in terms of what goes to the landfill, has one of the most advanced recycling programs in the country. We recycle all our waste oil, and that came about because we had 54 filling stations in Lafayette. 52 of them were dumping all the oil in the storm drains, and filling the bio with an oil sheen that went all the way to Abbeville and Vermilion Bay. But that was resolved. So Lafayette is really, and that was done with a Blue Ribbon Committee. People that don't have an economic dog in the hunt, that are willing to investigate and study and look at the best course forward. That's what we need to do with our electricity. And I had a real problem with this whole plan put together without public notice of any kind. There's no public hearing, is somewhat after the fact. I don't know if how committed they are, whether they're selling bonds, they're coming close to that. Not a good time to sell bonds because the interest rate is out of the roof. We're lucky if we can sell bonds for 5% interest. So it's really important that we as citizens speak up to the new administration and say, let's get the lowest cost electricity. Let's get rid of peak demand for our businesses and hospitals and so forth. We can do it better. With modern equipment and using solar and waste heat, whatever is available to us at much lower cost, we should be able to lower significantly our costs to residential customers as well as this very significant cost to peak demand commercial customers. And it's kind of important that our legislature whacked, I think, an 8% sales tax on commercial power in Lafayette. So people building businesses, looking for sites around the country, one of the first thing they look at is electrical costs. When you say it's coal-fired and it's peak demand, people say, oh, I'm going to go to Texas. And Texas rates are unbelievably lower than ours. I mean, they had a problem with the big freeze a year or so ago, but I went to a Texas Energy Conference and spoke to the energy broker that set up a contract for the Texas prison systems and the Texas Department of Transportation offices in 225 counties. And that was a 7-year contract at 2.8 cents a kW. I met one of the brokers, who's a guy from Russia, and he invited us to his ranch up near Tyler, Texas, and me and my Boy Scout troop. So we went up there, and he's got about 150 acres of beautiful wooded area, and he's got a little lodge and garage and, several buildings and freezers and everything. And I said, what kind of contract you have for electricity, being that you're an electrical broker in Texas? He said, well, he said, I'm paid for 4 cents a kW. We pay 9 in Lafayette. But I have no nighttime charges. No charges from sunset to sunrise. And no weekend charges from sunset on Friday to sunrise on Monday. Well, I said, what are you paying for electricity per month? He said, well, it's around $30 a month, but I think I can get it cheaper. A simple facility in Louisiana has been $400 or $500 a month or more. So there's a way to cut those electric bills, to do it in such a way that is, environmentally sound. Wind is 25% of the power in Texas. It could be a significant part of our power, because we have these coastal bays that would be shallow water, close to the grid, with a very good wind resource. And I can say that from a wind study that I had done on the coastal bays from Atchafalaya Bay to Vermilion Bay. We have a significantly sound economic value in that wind, and we need to seize that opportunity and bring that low-cost power to everyone. So hopefully that you look at the plans going forward. I don't know how concrete, whether it can be reevaluated, but the engineering firm certainly making recommendations that included all the low-cost power opportunities: wind, solar, waste heat recovery, combined cycle, gas, hydrogen units, all these, the path we should be going on, use a merchant power plant who would build the plant, not charge us a nickel for it. This is a path we need to take, We don't have to be penalizing the community of Lafayette with $1 billion bill between closing the Rotamaker plant of $600 million and $354 million. You put it together, and we right close to $1 billion that you will be paying if you have electricity in Lafayette. So thank you all for listening. I hope that we can put together a team with the new administration to reevaluate this plan and find a better plan that would serve Lafayette better and more economically and be an environmentally sound plan. So thank you all for listening. I think the next program will be Chris Dozan from St. Martin Parish will be on the program and talk about all the things St. Martin Parish has done to make our flood issue a lot better here in Lafayette. They did the Joe Day Canal, so thank y'all for listening. Appreciate it.